one.
What to do, what to do. This is the Brothers on Books podcast, where we find great books that will give you real value and actionable steps and have fun in the process. Please reach out to us at brothersonbooks@gmail.com for any book recommendations, or if you would like to be a guest host for a particular book you have in mind. A great review or rating on whichever platform you're listening to this would be greatly appreciated. And lastly, if you can think of any friend, family member, or coworker that might like this episode, please pass it along. I'm Alex Allwile, and with me as always is Jack. Jack, how you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. We had a good Passover Seder last night, and it's kind of fitting. We're going to be talking about this book on Passover, and it's nice to be back up in Michigan, and you are sadly missed.
Yeah, I too also had a nice, I guess I would say I had a nice dinner last night. There wasn't a whole lot of Passover sedering going on. We did say some prayers, but really just ate and talked.
Yeah, we had.
So I guess it's fine.
There were some songs and questioning going on before dinner, but then once the kids searched for the afikoman, and it kind of just it's got out of hand.
Yeah, I guess I would guess if the more kids you have, probably 12 and under, the more likely you are to do like a true Seder. Mm-hmm. When you get a bunch of sort of non-religious late 20 to early 30-year-olds around, they probably just sort of want to eat and talk.
Yeah.
Which is, in many regards fine by me.
Yeah. So Al.
So Jack,
the book for today. Well, what are we reading?
We are reading Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor E. Frankl. Yeah. I believe you chose this book, correct?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, Mr. Frankl is I've heard about him from a lot of people, and there's a lot of other podcasts where they often question, the guests, and they ask what books do you like to read, or what's been a very meaningful book. And I've heard about this book, Man's Search for Meaning, many times in terms of just a good life perspective book. So I was eager to pick this, and you had already at least listened to it, I think.
Yeah, that's correct. I had listened. I think I listened to this probably, if I had to put a time frame, I would have guessed the summer of 2018. So almost 3 years ago, I think. Mm-hmm. It was, I thought, sort of like what you said, very insightful then, and it was very insightful reading it a second time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
you want to give us a breakdown of?
The format for this discussion will be, we'll kind of do it in a couple phases. We'll kind of look at Victor's life, before he entered the Auschwitz concentration camp, and then a lot of the book centers around the actual life in the concentration camp or camps. He was in 4 different camps, I think, and then life after camp. So Viktor Frankl grew up in Vienna, Austria, and so life before camp, he kind of, and we'll talk about this more in the life after camp, but he was a psychologist, psychiatrist? I always get those confused.
He was a psychiatrist. He went to med school, so he was a psychiatrist.
Yeah, so a psychiatrist, and he had kind of developed this therapy called logotherapy. And I mean, I didn't actually remember this, but he had been thinking about this before he even went into the camps, this idea. And so when Hitler entered, or the Nazis entered Austria in 1938, he actually got an opportunity to go to the U.S., and he elected not to go. And he kind of just thought it was his duty. And I mean, he talks about, one of the 10 commandments is like, honor thy mother and father. And so he elected to stay and kind of carry out what he considered his duty to his parents, and kind of gave up the chance to work on his lifelong work, this logotherapy. Um, yeah, so he kind of gave that up, thinking that it was his duty to be there for his parents during this time. Um, so
Yeah,
I
I think
mean, yeah,
he tells that interesting story where I think there was a synagogue that I think was sacked, and his father brought home like a tablet
right.
with just one of the 10 commandments on, and he asked him what it was, and it was the commandment that said like honor thy father. And he said at that moment he knew he had to stay. Yeah, that's I mean, I guess actually when I read that, the question, so to me it seemed like he was at least aware of what the Nazis were doing at that time. Did you get that impression?
At that time, yeah, I mean, I think it was at least somewhat clear, because his parents were urging him to go to the US. And the fact that even his parents were urging him, I think kind of, you you could at least think
Yeah.
that they probably knew something was going on. And also later on, when he talks about when they're entering Auschwitz, people knew of Auschwitz because there was like silence when they realized that's where they were going. So
Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, what were your thoughts like right after finishing the book?
Oh man, I guess where to begin. I think from a personal standpoint, listening to him talk really puts, I mean, life in perspective of, kind of like what are real problems. Uh, I guess, and I think we'll sort of, and I guess this is just how I took it, but we'll get into this at some point. I think he puts a huge emphasis just on like personal responsibility, like, your life is your responsibility, and you should live it. If you see meaning in your life, there is meaning in your life, and you can do what you want to do, and if you want to be happy, you can sort of be happy. And the first time I listened to it, I think it really helped me a lot. Now, I wasn't particularly happy with where I was in life and what I was doing, and it sort of made me, I think, reevaluate just kind of how I felt about it, or how I felt about my own life, and it made me take a step back and sort of, I guess, just I think after reading this book, I felt a lot happier, is
Mhm.
what I would say. So from a personal standpoint, I think it helped. It actually did help me a lot. So I
Mhm.
I really enjoyed reading it, and yeah, I highly recommend it to anyone whenever I talk about books. I guess what were your thoughts?
Um, I liked. Well, yeah, we'll talk about this logotherapy more later probably, but yeah, the idea that more like looking to the future, not really dwelling on the past, just kind of living in the moment and trying to figure out why you're doing what you're doing. Um, and I also kind of thought that there's a lot of books that a few books that I've read that kind of talk about, you can't change like, these external factors, but at the end of the day, you can always choose how you react. And that's a book that's a like a very strong message in like the Mark Manson books, that the subtle art of like not giving an F if anyone's
Oh
read
yeah,
that. Or so I
yeah.
wonder if some of those other authors had read this and kind of built off that. Um, so I very much enjoyed the book. A little depressing. The first part, I found particularly interesting, where he's actually in the camp. The the part about his work I didn't find quite as insightful, but I thought you kind of got the gist from the first half on where he was going with all the stuff. Um, yeah. So, well, shall we take a break and go to an ad?
Yeah. So pickleball, the greatest sport you've never heard of. Pickleball is the fastest growing leisure sport in the United States. It is a mix between tennis and table tennis. However, don't let the average age of this participant in this sport fool you. The game has fierce competition and only the will of a champion can thrive. Go buy some paddles and balls and play pickleball, the greatest sport you've never heard of. I guess, speaking of pickleball, we only have about a month and a half till we have our Atlanta tournament. Jack, have you been practicing?
Does mental practice count? I've been mentally preparing.
I did. The game is, it's probably one of our favorite childhood movies, The Little Giants, as whatever that linebacker says. The game is 90% mental and 50% physical. So I think mental workouts counts, as long as you can envision.
I've also been. I did go on my first long run in a while yesterday, 4 miles. So that was
okay. That's pretty far.
Yeah, so it's just nice to be out. It's kind of cool out, and yeah, it's just nice to be outside and just have time to think. And most of it was because I was thinking about this book, because there's definitely a lot to think about. So I guess I guess
essentially we near.
What's that?
I was just going to say, we nearly had I felt like we nearly had a flood last night. My yard is, as it's apt to do, is pretty submerged in water.
Really?
It's really coming down. Yeah. As far as I know, nothing has been damaged, but it's never good to see. The sauna is still intact, but it's probably never good to see your yard as probably 2-inch rain puddles.
Yeah.
Chilling on your house. It's not a good feeling.
Yeah. For the listeners, Al is building a cordwood sauna in his backyard. Very unique undertaking.
I am. Yeah. It has been a slow, laborious process.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it is. In the words of Mr. Frankl, it has given me meaning. So.
Okay. For
yes.
the
so I guess part one,
go ahead.
I was just going to say we're going to talk about his experiences in the concentration camp, and I guess mainly he starts off with going to Auschwitz, correct?
Yeah. He talks about what's the experience like coming off the trains. They're sending kids and women on one way, men on the other. There's a Nazi soldier kind of just pointing left or right. And, I think he said 90% of people basically went right to the gas chambers. And that was, to the left. So if you got to go to the right, you were one of the lucky ones who got to live for a little bit longer. Hopefully. Now, I will say, I this book, when he talks about, well, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts of right when he's getting off, or?
Well, I think I was just going to give that little story of what he told, is that he tried to smuggle in essentially his work on logotherapy, or his life's work that he was going to publish as a book into the camp. And he was trying to hide it. And I think the guard, I don't exactly remember, the guard hit him or something. And then it sounded like he was going to go left, but then just kind of at the end decided to send him right. And then he gets back, or he goes to the camp, and he asks one of the longer inmates where his friend that was on the train with him. And the guy goes, "Did the guard say left?" And he says, "Yeah." And then the inmate just points outside to the smoke rising from the crematorium. Yeah. Imagine that's got to be a wake up call.
Yeah.
I don't know how would you sort of respond? Like how would you respond to that? Like,
yeah, I think it kind of underlines how, I mean, he talks about it in terms of how do you get in the mind of the average prisoner in Auschwitz? Like their sense of humor starts to change, their outlook on life starts to change, the way they speak to other people starts to change. And yeah, it's just because he kind of talks about there's like, three phases of an inmate's experience. There's like, one like just following like admission to the camp, and then there's then the phase where you get kind of entrenched in like the camp routine, and then the third would be like if you actually got released. But um yeah, it's the dialogue changes a lot, it seems, as you're in there longer.
yeah, I guess you want to talk about some of the working conditions that they underwent, because it seemed pretty brutal,
Yeah, I
and
mean,
it
I
also
guess.
seemed very, I don't know, it's just
Wait, say that
you
again.
can go.
What did
You
it
can go.
seem?
What were
Sorry.
you going to say?
Well, I was just gonna say,
I just see. I
I
was going to say it seemed like it was very variable, because he talked about how like his like supervisor, and how everyone wanted specific supervisors, because
Mhm.
if you got a good supervisor, like, you know, that person could save your life. And he talks about how he befriended some supervisor and was like giving, I think he was giving him like advice about his wife. Was that correct?
I
And
believe
how
that's
this guy
correct.
would
Yeah.
like save him. He would save him. He would. It's like these little things that I think you would never think of being a big deal, like saving him a spot in like the front of the soup line,
Hmm.
where the cook would go down all the way to the bottom of the pot, and he would get some like peas instead of just like,
Right.
chicken broth.
Yeah.
And how he would protect them from like sort of vicious guards, just because he like sort of talked to them, and I guess he sort of befriended them. I mean, it's just like very minute things that you would never think, could save your life. But he talked about this guy like he saved his life, like I think 2 or 3 times.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I think, I mean, a big thing was, yeah, I mean, you mentioned like the supervisor or the people that are around you. And also, I mean, when I was in Auschwitz in 2017 in December. And now, I mean, the size is unbelievable. I mean, these barracks go for as like long as you can see. And some of them are not really walled. Like they are, I mean, he calls them huts, and that's literally what they are. It's like fabric as the walls. And so our tour guide when we were touring Auschwitz, mentioned like it was very helpful if you could get an inside job, like indoors, like if you could clean up like the mess hall, or if you were, cleaning up in the gas chambers, that was incredibly helpful to your survival rate. Because, well, I mean, when we were walking around in December, I mean, my thought was, how does anyone survive this?
because it was so
So
cold.
it was so cold. I just
Yeah,
couldn't
because
believe.
and he sort of spoke like for the most part, it seemed like a lot of times they didn't have shoes, and they didn't
Right.
really have I mean, the clothes, it sounded like they just had t-shirt or like the little pajama shirts, and it sounded like they were, for the most part, usually sort of deteriorating off their bodies.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
think one of his problem, I forgot what the disease is, but basically his feet would
typhus.
swell, typhus or edema or typhus.
Oh no, so
Um,
he in the yeah, that would be edema, I think.
uh-huh.
I
Yeah,
think
because
he ended up taking care of all the typhus patients, and he at the end got it.
yeah.
But the
Um,
the thing with the feet, I think, is edema.
Yeah, because he talked about how he had to keep his shoes untied because of his like swollen feet. Um, and he kind of, yeah, you kind of
Yeah.
hear him like just the language starts changing, and like they start like being like oddly curious with what they can withstand. So they're instead of, you would think you would try to be as warm as possible, but then they're kind of curious, like, oh well, if we go stand outside, you know, oh we're not getting, the flu, we're not catching cold. So like you start thinking like, how much can, my body take? And it's a lot if you have a reason why to live.
Yeah, well, he also makes the comment that like when he would be deemed, I guess, sick, he
Hmm.
like viewed that as almost, I mean, because initially when I read that, I would have been worried that if I was deemed sick that they just immediately would kill you. But he made it sound like if you were deemed sick, they just had you like lie in the hut with no food for like 2 days. And it sounded like that was a plus. I guess it was a plus to just lie there with no
Hmm.
food than to have to go out and work. Uh,
Yeah, he was also talking
which,
along those lines. He would talk about like how it was like key to make you look as healthy as possible. So they would like shave a lot, like shave their face to make them like look
yeah,
younger, I guess. I don't know where they're getting the materials to shave, but he kind of mentioned that too.
and always stand like, your shoulders straight, hump up, and never limp, even if your feet are
Hmm.
hurting. You like
Yeah,
don't limp.
yeah. And he was basically like laying tracks most of the time, right? Or he was digging like I don't, was it ditches or I don't actually
It
know
was
what he
railroad.
was.
I think the majority of it was laying, yeah, railroad tracks.
Yeah.
But it sounded like that was the most brutal conditions. I think at some point he got shipped off to some other factory where he was working inside. And then at
Uh-huh.
one point he was actually back to being a doctor treating all the
It,
typhus patients,
yeah. And look,
which is
yeah, that was
where he
probably,
eventually got it.
yeah, inside. Yeah, I mean the story to, I guess, when you said that they got, yeah, to the other concentration camps, there's that story where they're getting transported from Auschwitz, and they have to go back through Vienna, and he actually sees his house where he grew up in. I mean, that must be crazy to begin with. And then they continue, and some of them think they're going to Mauthausen, and Mauthausen. I've actually been to Mauthausen too, but it's where like these steps of or stairs of death. It was like a quarry, and they would have the people take big blocks and then march up these steps. So, so he talked about when they were getting transported. Some of them thought they were going to Mauthausen, and there's this part of the Danube where the tracks would have to cross to go to Mauthausen, and then when they realized they weren't crossing the Danube, they started cheering, and they're like, "Oh, we might only be going to Dachau or one of the others, or a satellite of Dachau."
Yeah.
Kind of, that was kind of. I mean, it's hard not to chuckle. Even it's like so kind of crazy to think about, but yeah, I guess they considered Mauthausen just absolute death, I guess.
Yeah, I mean,
So
there's not really I guess it's like where, the choices are certain death and like
yeah,
most likely death.
yeah,
And it's weird to like cheer for like most likely death.
yeah,
Uh, but yeah, I mean, it's an incredible story.
yeah.
Uh, so I guess sort of the next thing we were going to talk about is at the end, I guess at the not necessarily at the end of, it was probably about halfway through the book, he like writes out this conclusion that there are only two types of people. There are decent people and then non-decent people. And I thought this was probably one of the more I personally thought this was one of the more interesting sections when he's talking about, because everyone asks like, well, how could these guards, how could these guards do these terrible things? Like,
Mhm.
how could you as a human treat other humans this, this awfully. And he sort of goes into, this sort of expose on, they're always going to be sadists, like people that just like pain. And I guess being one of these terrible guards kind of has a selection bias to be for sadists, because he made it sound like when you really needed something vile and awful done, it was like the same couple of guards, I guess, always chosen, and they were almost always sadists.
Yeah, or even volunteered.
He then brought up right, yeah. He then brought up the point that not all of the, not all of the, I guess, Nazi commanders or people that worked in the camps, like it's hard to say like that they treated them well, but at least showed them some decency, because he tells these two stories where one of the camp commanders, who was a Nazi officer, spent his own money to go buy medicine for prisoners, and he didn't tell anyone. And I'm assuming he didn't tell anyone because, I'm assuming he probably thought that if people knew he was doing that they would kill him, right? Or at least demote him.
Get in trouble, yeah.
And then he told this other story about how after liberation, these Hungarian Jews, essentially a different camp commander, they smuggled him and hid him in like the woods, and refused to give him up to, the Allied forces unless they like promised to treat him well, because he had helped them so much.
Yeah, that was a good story.
And then he flipped that by saying that I guess the senior camp warden, and I guess a camp warden would be like an elected Jew of the camp who was a prisoner. He was talking about how this person was harder on all of the prisoners than any of the SS guards, and he was incredibly vile to them. And from this, the conclusion he drives is that, either people are decent or they're non-decent, and it doesn't really matter which group you're in. There's no prediction of just being in a certain group doesn't necessarily make you decent, and it doesn't necessarily make you non-decent.
Yeah, like I guess what I took away is kind of like there are no absolutes. Like you can't just put link one characteristic to a group of people. There's always going to be decent and non-decent people in any group.
I guess the conclusion you sort of have to draw from what he's saying is that, which is something I don't think anyone would ever say, but it's just that just because you were a Nazi doesn't mean you're necessarily a terrible person.
Right.
Even though, that's always sort of what I thought, but I guess you don't know what, I don't know. That's sort of what I'm drawing from what he's saying. It sounds weird to say that though.
Yeah, personal story, like Elena's father runs a bar in Vienna. There are some descendants of Nazi soldiers that go into that bar, and they seem very nice. So, there's just no absolutes, I guess. I don't know if that's really,
Yeah, and then the other, going off that, and then the other thing he talked about is I felt the hope that he had for people that he deemed indecent, because he always speaks about how, people have the power to switch from one group to the other. And I guess this sort of goes after his liberation, but he talks about how he would visit the prisons and talk to the inmates about how they have the power to choose, like to change their lives and like live. You can't change the past, but you can change how you operate in the future. And he had all of these prisoners write him, after he had talked to them, he had all these prisoners write him letters about how after speaking to him and listening to sort of his theories, they had gotten their lives together, gotten out of jail, and were then successful members of society, which is, sort of interesting. I mean, I think it's a good type of mentality to have.
Yeah, he was kind of saying that,
You have any thoughts on that?
I mean, just to piggyback, like, I mean, in the camps, he was talking that the thought of suicide is pretty common. And he was talking a lot, that people would sometimes just run into the electric fence as a way to, just end it. And he kind of was just preaching like you find something to look forward to. There's something unique about you that you have some sort of responsibility or a role in someone's life that only you can do. So that just think of something that is uniquely you and have something to look forward to maybe. But yeah, it's hard to have hope because I mean a lot of people lose hope because they don't really know how long they're going to be there. They don't. There's questions about like, are the people that they love even alive anymore? There's a lot of reasons one could lose hope.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it would be very easy to lose hope.
Yeah. I mean, and the quote he brings up a lot in the book is that Nietzsche quote, which says, he who has a why to live for can bear with almost any how. So when you find some sort of meaning in your life or a reason why you need to do something, you'll weather a lot of storms.
Right. I think he then sort of ties that back to a disproportionate amount of people like die right after, Christmas or important birthdays or like milestones of their lives. And he tells the story of one of his friends who had what I took to be like sort of a delusional dream, saying they were liberated. They were liberated at the end of February. And then when the end of February passed and they weren't liberated, he died like a week after that. And he sort of said that on his like death certificate, it said, I don't exactly remember what it said, but Frankl essentially attributed it to just loss of will. I guess it's hard to say what is actually true.
I mean, I guess what is the heard. I guess I was just going to ask. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say I've heard many other stories like that. Even recently, I think not too long ago, I remember hearing this. I mean, it's not really that bizarre, but this sort of odd story in the news about this cancer patient wanting to see the last Star Wars movie, and they gave him, after it was done, they gave him an early screening of the movie, and he had lived with cancer for like a year or so. And then he saw the movie and he died like a week later. But because I mean, it sounded like they were making it sound like he was a hardcore Star Wars fan. So I guess to go back to Frankl stuff, like his meaning was to, essentially finish the end of this series that he loved. And then after he had done that, I guess what Frankl would say is that he lost sort of his will to live.
So you think the guy that had the dream about being liberated in February, it was just like, so once he had that expectation, he like found it in himself to live to that point, but after it didn't happen,
right after
that, then the hope kind of gets drained.
Right, like once you make yourself like geeked up to make it there, and then when your expectation doesn't happen, you're like destroyed on the inside. I guess I can give a similar quote. I remember the first half marathon I ran, I thought I saw mile marker 11. And I was like, so, I mean, my legs were like killing me. And I'm like, all right, I only got 2 more miles. And then I ran, and by this time I had really been slowing down, and I ran another mile, and I was then at mile marker 11. So for some reason, when I saw mile marker 10, I thought I saw mile marker 11. And in the grand scheme of things, like, thinking you have to run an additional mile isn't that much more, but that seemed like such a colossal mountain to me. Like, inside, it like crushed me. Like, I started walking, and I had to walk like a pretty, after I like realized that I had an additional mile, I essentially walked the next mile. But in reality, it's not really that much more, right? Like, I've still run 10 miles before this.
Yeah.
It's like, why am I now, like, crushed? But yeah, it did a number on me in my head.
Did you actually, when I was reading this book, he talks about putting yourself through like unnecessary pain, and I actually was thinking about training for the half marathon. Did you? I guess for me, I did find a lot of kind of satisfaction from preparing for that and going through it. I wonder how he would kind of view that. Did you think about like that at all? Or like, did you get a lot of like satisfaction from, I guess, going through that?
Going through the training?
Like the whole process, yeah. And then after it was over, how did you feel? Or did you kind of feel like, oh, it kind of was like, oh man, what do I do now? Because now it's over. I did it, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, I had that feeling for a lot of things. I hated training for the half marathon, mainly because I just don't like running. But yeah, it's like I definitely get that feeling. Like, when you would, I have a feeling like that's really how I'm going to feel when I finish grad school. It's like I mean, isn't that how you felt, or isn't it sort of how you feel now that you've passed all your tests? Like, you've devoted
Yeah, I mean,
all this time to studying these exams, and now it's kind of like, well, what do I do now?
yeah, it's kind of like it in the back of my mind, I actually thought, am I not passing these just because I like don't want, because it's kind of become like my thing. Like I just like, I go to Starbucks for hours or Barnes and Noble and study. That's kind of like what I do. And like, yeah, like kind of
you have to like
rethink my
you
goals
essentially have to reshape your life.
Yeah, exactly. And it is kind of, yeah, it is like a weird, yeah, it's man's search for meaning. Like, so what is my kind of meaning now? I don't know. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's how, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I definitely don't do grad school like I used to do it, when I would, work, 11 or 12 hours a day and then come home and study for another, 3 or 4 hours. I'm not doing that anymore, but I probably will be, a little, I would imagine I'll be a little lost when I finish with, I guess, life. But I guess that sort of takes, I think I'm going to come a little out of order of what we had planned,
okay.
But okay. I guess that sort of takes me to the thing. Definitely the first time I read this, the thing that I got the most out of this, and he has like a page like blurb on the meaning of life. And I guess I'll just sort of read his quote, or sorry, what I wrote down, and which is that there's no really nebulous meaning of life, only that each person has his or own individual meaning at specific times in specific places. And the first time I read this, like, probably from when I was 20 to like 25, I just felt like I don't know, I felt like I was sort of lost a little bit. Like, I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing. It was very like, what is my purpose? Like, what am, I don't know. Do you ever feel like that? Like, why am I here? Like, what am I supposed to, like, what is my purpose in life?
Yeah,
I guess what he's saying is that,
yeah, I mean, I was, yeah, I mean, I definitely have felt those types of things. I mean, he talks about how it's like kind of healthy to have that type of tension. Like there's this like internal struggle kind of where you're trying to figure it out. And he also, I kind of like that he talks about it, your meaning of life doesn't have to be the same all the time. Like, and it can change,
Right.
by the hour, by the day. And it changes, depending on the person, and it's like unique, it's your own unique thing. So,
So he like the thing that I loved is he likens it to this chess analogy that if you were to ask a chess master what is the best move, and the chess master couldn't give you an answer because there is no individual best move. Like it's
right.
dependent on where you are in the game. And that's sort of, I think, what I took away is that there is no really like general meaning to life. You have to, at any given moment, you have to figure out like what the best thing to do is. And he sort of ends it with this: each man is asked by life and only he can answer it. So I think it just, to me, made it sound like it's okay to not really know, what is globally your purpose, but just if you can think of it in a minute by minute time frame, you do okay. Like, I guess, like for this hour, I've got us blocked off recording this, this podcast, and for this hour, that is sort of my purpose.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a liberating thought, because it doesn't like you can choose to do whatever, from regardless of your past. We've put in a tremendous amount of time in our like studies, but it doesn't mean we necessarily have to continue if we find some sort of other meaning. I mean, maybe this podcast is our meaning. I don't quite. I mean, it could be. I mean, I like doing it.
Yeah, I like. I mean, this is a lot more fun than doing chemistry. So,
I mean, even though we, put in like a decade of work, I mean, he also talks about just because you might pivot, kind of, you still have a lot. There's a lot of like mental assets that you've gained from your past experiences. So maybe just because we don't exactly go in the field exactly how other people have done it that have gone through the studies we have, we'll still be able to use our past forward. And I think that is kind of a liberating thing, that you can choose what to do going forward.
Yeah, very, very, very much so.
So should we?
So I guess with that, let's talk about after liberation.
Okay. Well, I guess
I think that was the next section.
Yeah,
or did
sure.
you want to continue on that?
No, that's fine. Yeah, we can. I mean, I guess I actually didn't mention this in the beginning, but he actually wrote this book in like 9 days, like 9 consecutive days, I guess. And I mean, you can kind of tell that. I mean, he was thinking about logotherapy during, but even before he went into the camps. And then because you mentioned his manuscript got stolen, this was part of his meaning. Like this was kind of his brainchild. So he had it in his mind.
It was his life's work.
Yeah, so he had this in his mind the entire time he's in the camp. And so he's kind of taking mental notes with this in the background. And he was able to write this book incredibly fast because, I mean, there's so many. I mean, he's thinking all day and kind of analyzing these people in that lens. Now, and he also said he was thinking about publishing this anonymously. I thought it might have said he was thinking. I don't have this written down, but that he was thinking of putting his Auschwitz like tattoo number as like the author. But for whatever reason, I guess
it sounded like he was talked out of it right before he published. Like he wrote it anonymously up until the point it went to, I guess, a publisher. And at that point, like his remaining friends or family like convinced him to put his name on it. and I guess he did.
And he did stay. I mean, he elected to stay in Vienna, and he did teach. I'm guessing basically what he learned in the camps.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing. I mean, what did you think about like him kind of just like? I mean, I guess this goes back to the decent and undecent like framework. Like, I mean, he knows there are good and bad people. Like, how do you think you would have stayed in Vienna after all of that?
No, not a chance. I don't think I possibly could have. I mean, because I mean, he even says it like he knew some of his neighbors may have like turned him in or like betrayed him. I mean,
before.
And that sort of goes back to what I was talking about, how he's like very open to people, changing their future behavior. But I mean, I guess at a certain point where I think that's like an honorable like mentality, like at a certain point, you have to recognize that these people like, essentially treated you like an animal. I mean, worse than an animal. They treated you below that. I think I would have had a hard time feeling comfortable, I guess, around my previous neighbors. And he even then he sort of talks about it after, right? Like, because he said, like people would be like, oh yeah, that happened to you, or people would say like, oh, I didn't. He said some people just sort of claimed ignorance, but I think at a certain point it probably would have been hard to be totally ignorant of what was happening. It must have known something, or they just didn't, or they didn't want to know what was happening. Like they just chose not to know.
Yeah, he along those lines, he talked about like after the liberation, some of the prisoners kind of had like this bitterness because, well, when they would get home, I mean, just what you said. So some people would claim they didn't know about it, and then others would say things like, we too have suffered. But like it's kind of comparing suffrage and kind of a race to the bottom type of dialogue. And then I thought another thing that was interesting that he talked about after people were liberated was they kind of thought because they went through this awful thing that maybe they wouldn't experience pain or suffering anymore. Like because they had been to the bottom of the bottom, that anything will be fine, everything will be fine in comparison to that. But they were finding that they still could like have pain and still suffer.
Yeah,
I thought that was yeah.
I mean, I guess that is I would have thought sort of the same thing. Like, after living through that, you would just be totally numb, right? To like everything. But I guess that's not really healthy. That's not a healthy life. It's not a productive life. You have to be able to, I mean, he sort of starts talking about like the power of love too. Right. Which is, I thought.
Yeah, he talks about it a lot. I mean, that's one of the big whys in people's life, like their meaning. Like it could be
like to
filling
love.
Filling something that's uniquely you,
feeling like love for someone else.
Yeah,
like feeling love for someone else, or being felt like feeling loved, which
or back to the responsibility thing. Like your kid might be relying on you to be there, so like that sense of responsibility too, to fill some void in someone else's life.
Right. Yeah. Very true.
So, shall we I guess shall we move on to talking a little bit more about his brainchild logotherapy?
Yeah. Well, you wanna briefly, we sort of, I think we sort of like brushed over it. You want to talk about like his feeling, because I thought probably the most devastating story he told was his story of like immediately what was viewed as liberation. So like that story where the Red Cross comes through the gates and everyone's told they're liberated.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you remember this, but then at night the SS comes back and says they have to clear the camp, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Frankl and like a couple of his friends refused to get on the train, like on the trucks, for the camp to be cleared. And all he then ever sees is that, and then just to go back to how essentially Nazis are all terrible, is that even after they've lost the war, they take all these prisoners after they've lost, lock them in a hut, and then burn them alive.
Yeah.
And then all he sees is the pictures of like their burnt bodies. I mean, just to talk about that type of feeling. I mean, imagine what those people feel like, to think the hope that you feel like you've made it, to then just essentially be killed for really no reason at the end of the war. I mean, awful.
The Nazis were definitely trying to, at the end when they knew it was over, just try to kill as many. And they talked on the tour. They talk a lot about. There were these groups called Sonderkommando, and they were these special groups that assisted in like cleaning up the bodies in the ovens. So like cleaning those out and removing that. But a lot of the Sonderkommando like turned, and if you go to Auschwitz, you can actually see that one of the, I think, ovens or gas chambers is like destroyed. Like the Sonderkommando turned and like knocked them down. But yeah, I forget. I kind of forget that part though. So the SS wanted them to get on
they just
like
loaded them. They just said, like, the papers have been signed. We're just clearing out the camp, and I think it was trucks, and it was some weird story. Like, I think Frankl stayed to take care of a couple more like typhus patients instead of going with them to what they were being told was a freedom, and it was him and I think one of his friends, and they didn't go, and then they all leave. And then like the next day, the Red Cross comes back.
So that wasn't at Auschwitz, right? That was what camp?
No, it was not at. It was.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. Camp. Yeah, I was talking about Auschwitz at the. Okay.
Well, I mean, it's the same principle, right?
Probably, yeah.
You've lost, and you've just decided for some reason to just, all these people you've just sort of maliciously tortured for the past like years, you just kill for really no reason when you've lost. It would be, you can't even really liken it to anything. So logotherapy. So I guess it's sort of interesting because a lot of these main psychiatrists and psychologists all come out of Austria, which I didn't realize. Like Freud and the other guy he talks about, Alder, are both Austrian. I don't know if you. Yeah, Adler's also Austrian.
Okay. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I mean.
So I guess you want to give us a rundown of. So it was sort of interesting to me that Frankl was corresponding with Freud when he was like 16, which is kind of incredible if you think about it in today's terms, because Freud would have been like a big time, he would have been in the big time. So I guess Freud had his psychoanalysis, which is, it sounds sort of like, to me, like the study of the unconscious mind. Goes into your life is sort of determined by, I guess, these forgotten events of your childhood, and it puts a lot of human behavior being driven by instinctual motives. And I guess if you had to boil it down, it would be like into the will to pleasure. So like you're always searching for pleasure. And then Alder, so to me, Alder was sort of like, I had never heard of this guy, but his, I guess, psychology boils down to humans primarily being motivated by some type of inferiority complex. So they're driven to kind of find like a superiority, and that goes into then like a compensation phase where if you're inferior in something, you compensate for it. And then if you can't compensate for it, you then like sort of resign yourself to just determining that you're inferior in it. And then logotherapy would be like searching for a meaning of your life.
Yeah, I don't know if we mentioned, but logos is the Greek word for meaning. That's where it comes from. So logotherapy, in search for meaning, basically, or a willingness to find your meaning.
So I guess for me, it seemed like, at least just the way I took it, and I don't know, you may have taken it a different way. Freud in particular, I guess Freud's like theories, and then Alder's to I think a lesser extent, it was sort of like humans reacting to how external environments placed pressures on them, and that's like what shapes you. And then logotherapy kind of reverses it. It's like, yes, like external factors will influence you, but at the end of the day, your life is your life, and you have the the ability to kind of shape it how you want. I don't know. I guess, what were your thoughts on that? Or maybe I'm just totally explaining that wrong.
No, I think, it kind of says that logotherapy is, more, it's less introspective and less retrospective. So it's less, I guess, looking at past events and more looking forward. And then I guess when he says less introspective, now I'm actually kind of questioning that part. I don't know.
I guess, I mean, the thing that it just, to me, it seemed, maybe, and I'm making this too much of a simplistic, but it seems like he really argued just about, or what he taught was just essentially taking responsibility for yourself. And that it's like, if he talks about how all these people would tell him his problems, and then a lot of times he would just sort of reshape the problem in a different way, and then that would solve their issue. It was sort of like he talked about a husband whose wife had died, and the wife was his entire life, right? And the husband was so depressed and he couldn't do anything. And Frankl just asked him, well, it was sort of weird to me, and I didn't really get it, but it was like, well, how, if your roles had been reversed, like, how would you how do you think your wife would feel? And I guess his response was, well, she would feel terrible, because like I'm her entire life, just like she was in my entire life. And he was just kind of like, well, think of it like you've saved her, since like at some point everyone must die, like you've saved her all of this suffering, like, because she died before you, so you're doing the suffering for her. And then I guess that sort of cured her, or cured him. I don't know. I sort of thought that one was a weird story, but
No, I agree. Yeah, I didn't quite. Yeah, so some of the, yeah, and then he talked about, well, there was is it a rabbi, I think, that had like a bunch of kids that died in
right
camps, and his
in the
wife
Holocaust,
died,
yeah,
and then his his second wife couldn't
conceive.
birth a child, and I think Frankl kind of phrased it as like maybe, and I guess this rabbi actually wasn't all that great of a person prior, and that he was kind of phrasing it like maybe you weren't good enough to meet them in heaven yet. And maybe that's kind of what you
Right.
need to view the next part of your life is, the meaning is to be a good person and join them in heaven.
Or like the journey to become, a better person, so he can get to that, to get to heaven, to be with his family.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah. I guess, do you have any other thoughts on logotherapy?
I mean, I guess I never heard of that term, but I hear it spoken about like like know your why. Like a lot of people say that, like you have
Simon Sinek, I think.
yeah, or like yeah, like just understanding, because once you decide what you really want or what your meaning really is, then you'll kind of reverse engineer maybe what
How to
you need to
do it.
do to get it. But it's also kind of interesting because in the beginning he was kind of saying that the more you kind of pursue like happiness or pursue wealth or something, the more it eludes you. And it's the point where you kind of don't worry about it is when you actually get it. And it's
Oh,
kind of,
yeah.
yeah, it's like weird to think about, but it feels true when I look back on my life sometimes.
So that's actually, I can't believe I forgot to bring that up. I think that's a great point. And what I sort of took from that is that a lot of people say they like just want happiness. They want to be happy. They want to be successful. And I think the point was that happiness and success are byproducts of having like a well-defined, essentially, meaning to what you're doing. And if you go about doing your meeting, that you will just naturally be happy and become successful. So I guess it's like you can't, I think the point is you can't chase happiness and you can't chase success. You can only chase what
Chase
your
your meaning,
meaning
I guess.
is.
Yeah.
And then by
Okay.
chasing your meaning, you will become happy. Because fulfilling, I guess, the meaning of your life will make you happy. That was another thing that sort of really helped me the first time I read this book.
Yeah. Yeah. In the beginning, I don't know if we brought
Because
this up.
I feel like so many people.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, say what you're gonna say.
I was just gonna say in the beginning of the book that I think this was in the forward or yeah, but he kind of talks, there's three kind of sources for like meaning, and what, it's like work, love, and then I think he said like courage through difficult times. And that's kind of how he kind of thought about it, finding your meaning, like in those three buckets. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say, I feel like, I mean, even I've done this in the past, like so many people, I mean, myself included, just say like, I just want to be happy. That's really all I care about. And I think the point that he's making is that how do you search to be happy? You can't search to be happy. You have to search to do something else. And by doing that other thing, you will be happy. But if you just go out and try to be happy, like what do you, I guess the example I would use is like, I feel happy when I play pickleball. I don't go, right, like I'm not like trying to be happy, so I'm like, I'll go play pickleball. It's like I want to play pickleball, and then by playing pickleball I become happy.
Okay.
I think it's just I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So did you have a favorite quote or message?
I mean, I definitely think the thing that always sticks out in my mind and what I was thinking a lot through this book is like, yeah, like knowing your why. And it's really, if my, let's see if I can find the exact words because I always forget it. But the Nietzsche quote, you know, if you have, he who has a why to live for can bear almost any how. I mean, and actually, I think the first time I heard that, I think it was on like a Bigger Pockets podcast, and you know, they kind of talk about, you know, the thought of being financially independent, and when you, if you have a strong desire to do that, you kind of start thinking it gets the wheels turning on. Well, how do I actually accomplish that? And that's the how. And but it could look very unappealing to some people, and it looks like a grind. But if it's your why, it won't feel
you
that
can
that
do it.
bad. Yeah. What about you? Do you have a
Yeah.
favorite quote?
Yeah, my favorite quote was from the book, or I mean, from Frankl, and it just was, "Man is not fully conditioned and determined, but rather determines himself whether he gives into conditions or stands up to them. In other words, man is ultimately self-determining. Man does not simply exist, but always decides what his existence will be, what he will become in the next moment." And this
Okay.
was in the meaning of life section, essentially just saying that, I guess the way I interpret it is he's just saying that you as a, I guess, man or a woman have the ability to choose like what you will be in life and who you will become.
Mhm.
And I think that's a good mentality to have,
Mhm.
uh, just
I get.
going through life, because I think so many people just sort of allow life to happen to them instead of
Uh-huh.
impose themselves on their life.
Yeah. I mean, he kind
Guess
of
that's
there's a funny little anecdote he talks about, like, you know, we have the Statue of Liberty in the US, but he also thinks it's kind of like a yin and yang with liberty, but also responsibility. And he was kind of saying, like, well, we have the Statue of Liberty on the East Coast, but maybe we should have the Statue of Responsibility on the West Coast. There was
yeah. I thought that.
one more quote. This is kind of back to like a lot of the thoughts on suicide in the camp, but he and this is tying back to, you know, having a strong meaning, but he says a man who becomes conscious of the responsibility he bars towards a human being who affectionately waits for him or to an unfinished work will never be able to throw his life away. I like that one too.
Okay.
So, um, oh, and then I did want to mention for our listeners that did like this discussion, and this was oddly enough the book I'm about to mention I bought at the Auschwitz bookstore, and it was really the point of when I started reading a lot because after I went to Auschwitz, I really it was like really eye opening, and I just felt like I needed to read something on it, and I read a book called "I Was Dr. Mengele's Assistant." Now I definitely will slaughter his name, so I'm not even going to try. But it's called "I Was Dr. Mengele's Assistant," and I highly encourage reading this book if you like this discussion, and it'll give an inside glimpse on camp life, well, being Dr. Mengele's assistant.
I think maybe you need to describe who Dr. Mengele was.
Well, he was kind of the sick doctor who was trying a bunch of experiments on a lot of the prisoners of Auschwitz, and I'll leave it at that. But if if you like this book and wanna learn more about the camp life and how awful it sounds like it was, you might want to.
Okay. I think with that said, yet again, please reach out to us at brothersonbooks@gmail.com for any book recommendations, or if you would like to be a guest host for a particular book you have in mind. A great review or rating on whichever platform you're listening to this would be greatly appreciated. And lastly, if you can think of any friend, family member, or coworker that might like this episode, please pass it along. For our next episode, we will be doing The Dictator's Handbook, Why Bad Behavior is Almost Always Good Politics by Bruce Bueno de Mesquita and Alistair Smith. I read the introduction in the first chapter of this book, and it was very entertaining. So I think it's going to be I think it's going to be a good one, and I'll be interested to hear what you have to say about it.
Okay, looking forward to reading it. And I guess with that, we have a piano song that we will bow out to. And
all right,
talk to you later.
Later, Jack. Have a good one.